you, my friends, for joining me, for joining all of us. These are cold times for our society. We're far away. And in the Middle Ages, winter was a time to stay warm, to stay fed, and to reflect upon the spring to come. I am not a medieval scholar, but one of the themes that speaks to me is that of time for reflecting, time for preparing, and then time for doing and finishing a task. We are not done. Throughout the Middle Ages and before, well before clocks, time for thoughtfulness was present in daily life. We are nobles, every one of us in the society. We choose to be. We have the obligation to be thoughtful. And in this time of isolation, it is easy to withdraw. I know I have. It is easy to keep close to you and yours, to retreat to our estates, and to monitor our storerooms, and to look only to the absolute boundaries of our obligations. I look forward to spring, when we'll emerge from this cold time. I am optimistic about spring, but I'm pragmatic. I wonder, how shall we emerge? Will we be lean and hungry, vicious even? Or will we be keen of mind and prepared for the work that awaits? Again and again, I return to the virtues, the chivalric virtues that are conversation pieces throughout the society and beyond our far-flung community of communities. These virtues are not new concepts. They are well-worn, tried and tested, polished tools for thinking. I am not an innovator to speak of these. 2 years ago at Lily's War, I celebrated the 20-year anniversary of my knighting with fighting and conversation on the virtues. Then and now, I credit Count Logan with his inspirational speech at the 10th anniversary of his knighting. His words inspired me then. They inspired me a couple years ago to convene friends, old and new, at my 20th, and they inspire me today. I hope that this conversation inspires you to hone your thinking. We will not finish this conversation here. We will begin our conversation. Thank you for listening to that too long introduction, but special thanks to John and to Conna for agreeing to speak on faith. Talk with us, John.
Thank you, Excellency. It was an inspiring introduction. Welcome all to my home, my humble abode. This is the Archer's Rest, my small corner of whiskey and scotches, and where I feel the most comfortable at times. And sometimes that comfort comes from a variety of sources. In the Middle Ages, faith was one of those comforts. It is also one of the foundations of the knightly virtues. Less than a year ago, when I was knighted, I asked peers of the realm and friends to speak upon the different knightly virtues. Franchise, faith, generosity. I picked 7. There are multiple. As many opinions as there are in the world, knights had different ideas upon what made the virtues. For this series of discussions, we are using Duke Garrick's paper and treatise on the 7 virtues that he considered important for our society. And so today, His Excellency Hirsch has asked me to speak upon faith. And in the Middle Ages, faith was everything. It was your timekeeper, it was your day setter, it was your calendar, it was what provided for people after the fall of the Roman Empire. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but yes, the Roman Empire does come to an end. And but know that some of the items and inspirations and inventions that the Romans did collect and invent and put out were kept by the Holy Roman Catholic Church and shared. And that was an important thing. Faith wasn't just about the religion. In the Middle Ages, it was specifically the Christian religion, the Roman Catholic Church. It dictated the lives of both noble and the base-born people. And because of that, it was a binder between noble and base, the common man. The church taught through the readings and the teachings in the Bible that all men were equals in the eyes of the Lord. You know, you have the stories of the rich man trying to pass through the needle. You know, you have all the different other stories that Jesus spoke about. And so a lot of the stories from that period were based on what was taught in the Bible. A lot of times those relationships are symbiotic. If you look between Jesus and his disciples, they had faith in him while he had faith in them. And so faith became a very central pillar of medieval time period. You know, we as Scadians do not espouse to any one particular faith, and I'll discuss that a little bit. But faith in a deity or a set of deities was an important aspect in medieval culture. The men-at-arms of the ages contributed greatly to the church as a means to safely assure their souls of passage into heaven should they perish in battle. And if you think about it, when a knight was knighted, he took up a sword to protect everyone. And who provided that sword, though? It was the common man who provided that sword. Who provided the horse to the knight so that he could ride into battle? It was a common man. Who shoed that horse? It was a common man. Who clothed the knight? It was a common lady. It was all base-born people that did this. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. But it wasn't just the monopoly of Christian church. Faith went through multiple cultures of the medieval period. The Muslims had Muhammad. The Norse had Odin and all their gods. You know, the Norse gods, they believed that they were protected. The Norse were protected by the Norse gods. And the belief in the Great Hall in Valhalla gave the Norse tribes a faith that they would go on to Odin's Hall should they be struck down in battle. And there feasted in the evenings, and then gathered up swords, shields, armor, went out and fought the next day. And if they were to fall in the battles that were to resume the next day, they would be lifted up again and brought back to Odin's Hall where they could feast, tell stories, and have a good old time. So that was faith. That was faith that they believed in. So faith is an important aspect in medieval life. When you consider what the knights of the Middle Ages have to say on knightly virtues, nearly all of them, to a T, have faith on their list. A knight needed faith to protect him in battle, faith in his skill, in his horse, in his weapons, and in his armor. He needed faith in his king. You think about our pledge to the king and the crown of Calontir, our fealty oath. No matter what level we are all nobles. Some of us are peers. But we pledge our faith to the crown and kingdom of Calontir. And so we're putting our trust in our king. A knight had faith in his peers, the men he stood in line with, the men he went to battle with, arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield. He had faith in his men-at-arms and squires, because without them, he could not get prepared. He could not fight. A knight had faith in his opponents. The 14th century is a prime example of this, whereas knights were not looked upon as an opponent to be killed, but as an opponent to be captured. And if I was in battle and I was fighting my way and men-at-arms were being struck down around me, and I was found to be separated from my own lines and surrounded upon by my enemies, I would have to have faith in them to recognize the fact that I would yield to them and be treated with mercy and provided food, comfort, and some place to go. Now, sometimes that wasn't always the case, but it was the faith and trust in your opponent to do the right thing that often struck that. Besides these, a knight needed faith in the armor, his weaponsmith, the blacksmith, and down to the lowest denominator, for without their skills and support, he could not fulfill his feudal obligations to them. The same could be said true about our peers, our laurels. They need faith in the people that have inspired them. They provide faith to those who work with them and under them, learning skills. Faith, when understood in this manner, turns into trust. That's really what we're talking about today. We're talking about trust. We're not talking about just faith, but we're talking about trust. A knight with faith has placed his trust into 1,000 different hands, starting with his deity, to his king, and on down the line. So how does this translate into the modern Middle Ages? During my elevation ceremony, Mistress Sibylla was asked to speak on the knightly virtue of faith. And she wrote, faith comes in many forms. It is shown through encouragement, standing shoulder to shoulder with your brothers. Have faith in your conscience and your decisions upholding, as your sword has two edges, so must your understanding. And that means a lot, coming from a laurel who I respect and trust, whom I have faith in. Faith is a two-way street, my friends. So really, where does that leave us in the modern Middle Ages? I specifically mentioned Duke Garrick's treatise earlier. And he specifically pointed out that faith is a cornerstone of the knighthood in the Middle Ages. Raymond Lowell tells us that the office of the knight is to maintain and defend the holy faith Catholic. Of course, to them, faith meant Christian faith, and in the SCA, we don't actively recreate religion. But I, Duke Garrick, still feel that faith has a place in the SCA. The faith that a knight of the society must foster and defend is not the belief in the church, but the belief in the importance and validity of these virtues. And you can use these next words for any position in the SCA. A knight, laurel, peer, anyone, should not be a cynic or believe that his fellows and opponents are anything less than noble. A knight should believe in the inherent nobility of all, from the newest newbie to the winner of the crown tourney for which you struggled so hard. Foster and maintain these virtues, defend them if they are under attack, and you will be acting with knightly honor. And truly, you can put any person in that position. You could substitute any name you wish. When we first sat down and discussed what can we do to help keep the kingdom together, to bring it stronger, because we have not met in for so long of time. One of the things that I wrote down was that faith encompasses much more than a belief in a deity. It means trust. It is a trust in each other to do the right thing, to stand up for morals, values, and convictions. Trust builds faith. Without trust, there is not faith. Faith allows us to stand shoulder to shoulder in a shield wall, to attend events, trusting in autocrats that have built the events. Faith is not solely owned by the peerages. It is something that is present in each one of us as we go about our daily lives. And before I go much further, I'm going to ask Gustav or His Excellency Hirsch if there's anybody with any questions or comments.
This is a good time for me to go over the process. You are welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. You are welcome to type your question or your comment into chat if you don't feel like talking. And it doesn't have to be a question. It doesn't have to be a comment. This is a conversation. So you may have something to say and you may have something to ask. Please feel free.
Okay. I take it there are no comments or questions, Hirsch?
No questions currently in the chat. Thank you, John.
Okay. I do not have much longer to go. I do not like speaking overly long. And so this next section is really about what we and what I believe in this society has come to. I strongly believe that the faith we place in each other's values today is the faith in each other to do the right thing. Rather than faith in a spiritual sense, it is faith in a more secular sense, which translates into trust. This trust is a direct descendant of the trust a monarch placed into the hands of his advisors and peers. Consider the roles of our own monarch as they step from the thrones. They take and place the symbols of statehood into the trusting hands, asking for those to watch and care for them until their heirs take over the crown. A similar exchange would have occurred on the death of a monarch. In England, the Great Seal was often taken by the church and held until the new king could be anointed and crowned on the throne. Today, we do much the same thing where we hand over the symbols of statehood to those that the crown trusts, and they could be anyone. Knights such as William Marshall, Raymond Lull, Geoffrey de Charnay, and John Chandos all understood the importance of faith and trust. As it was the same for them then, it is the same for us now. We as a society strive to live in the current Middle Ages. And while we attempt to recreate those times, it is within the framework of our mundane lives. This is why faith in our Middle Ages is not taken in the same context of the past Middle Ages, but rather translates into a trust on all levels, much the same as it was back then. And at this point, I'm open for discussions, questions, comments.
I've got a comment.
Go ahead.
I mean, while there are many ideas of faith that John just spoke of, that are very, very valuable for us in our game, and that we can use the term faith as a great shorthand for a lot of ideas that we hold valuable. I think it's just important for us as students of chivalry and students of the Middle Ages to always be clear that that's not the Knights of the Middle Ages idea of what faith is. What I mean, like he spoke of faith being that support and belief in the divine power. That's pretty clearly the limits of where they put faith in that thing. All these other things that I'm sure they found value in, but not within. They would not have considered this part of that virtue, even though we have to, or we are able to use it in a little different way.
Fernando, I appreciate that comment because the faith in the Middle Ages changed dramatically. I mean, we recreate more than 1,000 years. Faith meant different things in different cultures and in different time periods. And I want to lower the bar and say, there's that old adage, the joke that everyone has to believe in something, and I believe I'll have another beer. It is perhaps as low as I care to go, but we choose to follow the ideal of faith, each one of us, for ourselves. And the modern interpretations and as well as the personal decisions are absolutely different from the Middle Ages. I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a beautiful contrast.
Yeah, we have to fit things. We have to fit things in the world we live in and our belief systems, etc. My only comment on it was that when people are looking at trying to figure out what some of these famous medieval knights and authors were writing about, what they were referring to, doesn't make it not a great conversation in a million ways to talk about all these things. You know, that again, that Garrick has written, the way Garrick defined it in his treatise, the way John was just talking about. Great points. Just want to hope that everyone who's here has that distinction of, are we talking about the way that the famous writer spoke about it, or are we talking about it within our game?
And in truth, when I was reading it and looking at it, I wanted to put this into a context where we as modern people could understand and get the same ideas from. And I think you sum it up very well. You know, in the Middle Ages, specifically from 1066 up to Henry VIII, there was only one church in Europe. Really, unless you were Eastern Europe, then Eastern Orthodoxy kind of. But the Roman Catholic Church had a very strong lock on faith, and right, wrong, or indifferent. That was the time period, and so trying to bring faith into the period of today with using the faith that the knights wrote about in the time period then could not possibly translate very well, especially as
to be clear, there's no criticism of what you said intended at all. So
yep, no, I took nothing at all. I am open to constructive criticism at any time, but no, I agree with where you were talking.
It's an addition, not a criticism.
Yep.
So I have a thought on this. I've thought about this a little bit on and off, and I've not come up with what I think is the right answer, but like a way to explore this, I think, is if we work backwards from their definition of faith, and then try to say from that, if we acknowledge what that meant to them, how can we translate that into what we're doing in the SCA? And as much as I like Garrick's answers, I don't think that that's exactly right, if that makes sense.
Certainly.
I have a thought. One of the things that John focused on was a historic view with faith in a deity. But in reality, I think for us in our current Middle Ages, we have replaced the deity with the crown. And what I mean by that is that as a whole body, whether we're peers or whether we're untitled nobility or the newest person to join our group, the central focus is the crown. My faith in all the years that I've been doing this has been a faith in the crown to be a guidance for us. And for some, it's a student relationship with their knight or laurel or pell, and through them to the crown. But it all seems to end there. And so the faith that we have in our gatherings and in our group as a whole and the things that we do is or revolves around the crown and kingdom. And I don't know, at that point, you know, I have faith in the crown to administer to the kingdom in a fair manner. And in the same vein as a peer, I would hope that the crown has faith in me as a peer to support them, to give them the best advice I can, and to nurture the kingdom through my students and the example that I set to everybody else. So I think that that's the key for me, at least, is that deity has been replaced by the crown, and we can build parallels from that any way we see fit.
Great points, Connell. There are some comments in the chat. Emmerich, do you want to speak to yours, or would you like me to paraphrase?
I can. It's just like that Kingdom of Heaven movie that was kind of inaccurate in a lot of ways, but there were some good concepts in it, and I really enjoyed the Kingdom of Conscience, and I think that Callantyr kind of embodies that a lot. You know, it's the overall machine. That's about all I got.
Thank you. I think it's very useful to consider our own individual acts of conscience contribute to how we are perceived as a kingdom, as being conscientious.
I'd like to respond to Connell if I could.
Please.
So I think you're on the right track, but I think, I mean, the state is the state and those are our kingdoms. So if anything, I think the church is the society at large. And I think that shows up, and I think it bears out in certain ways, right? You know, we swear to uphold not just laws of kingdoms, but the customs, ideals, and traditions of the society. And maybe that's where that centralized notion of faith is, because it's that interplay, and you know, our constant checking each other on what that behavior means that keeps the
Uh-oh.
Oh, we lost his grace.
Technology is fickle.
Sorry, guys.
Oh,
We
Not a
lost
problem.
it for
That's one of the things about this conversation. First of all, it is very challenging to have this conversation from a distance. But also, I want to reiterate, you know, we're not attempting to finish the conversation, but just to spark ideas. And in my opinion, what each of you find valuable about the virtues is valuable, because if it's valuable to you, then it's valuable.
Hey all, can I jump in?
please.
Hi, Verena here. I'm not dressed like I usually am. But in thinking about faith, I agree with John absolutely on the idea that it has a representation of trust, but I think it also has a facet of hope. And so as medieval knights were indeed, you know, doing their prayers and believing in their religious faith, what they were doing is that they were hoping that they were becoming holier, they were hoping in salvation, they were hoping in divine justice. And that's, I think, we have a lot of room to be hopeful. If you're having a bad week, or if you feel like maybe the society isn't going the right direction right now, you stick around because you have hope in the people around you and the goodness of your fellow members of the organization. That it is having this, that faith isn't just, okay, I'll trust you. And it's more, I am hopeful and maybe even joyful in the idea that we can be better, that there is something to get through, that there is indeed a reward after whatever hardship there is right now.
Verena, that was extremely, that really resonates with me. I have seen some lists of virtues that are, more than a dozen that list hope as a separate one. And I absolutely agree with the things you're saying about, faith and hope have a significant overlap. But the part that really spoke to me was when you said that we can all be better, because that, to me, that is one of the core purposes of the virtues, is not for the church or the crown or the local lord to beat you about the head and shoulders with the virtues, but for each of us to improve, to see what we need to in ourselves from the virtues. And I used the word optimistic at the beginning. I am hopeful and optimistic that we will emerge better, or at least as good as we were.
This is Kirk.
Go ahead.
I was going to follow on with what Donegal was saying, in that I think the crown is more our instrument of justice, whereas if we could say faith, it would be that all of us, to a greater or lesser extent, want to walk the walk. We want to be able to walk in and say, I'm a good guy, and therefore I will do this, this, and this, keep my word, be reliable, be interested in the Middle Ages, try to do better in that. So we're walking the walk on that, and that's where might be the common, to me, is the common interest across all of us, that you say, I'm this guy, and then your attempt is to be that guy, to be the guy that does not boast idly, but actually can say he's going to do it and then go out and do it. And that's where I'm coming in on an individual basis, from what I think would act as faith for us. And we have to do it that way because we, even 500 years removed, we still live under the shadow of what happens when people use the instrument of religion in a bad way. And so we have to step back from that, and so that it isn't used that way, but then come up with something else. And I think placing on the individual member to try to deliver on what they say is what we consider a faith within the society.
I totally agree with you, Kirk. That's a good summation, and that's where I was trying to get to. I might be a little too wordy sometimes, but especially when I'm writing. But being able to sit down and agree that there are certain things in humanity that are good and right, and that we all need to encompass as a society of folks. That was the core of what I was trying to get to. It wasn't just about the church.
So really quickly, and my timing is a little bad because I think this thought ties to a lot of the points that have been made previously with regard to faith. And I don't want to drag us too far away from the Christian ideal of faith, but within the Roman religion is a pretty key concept of the household god, or gods, plural, where you would take time out of each day, out of each meal in particular, to remember those kind of ancients of your family that have come before, and everything that culminated into who you are right now, and what you have managed to achieve in life came from someone before you. Within the SCA, I think this is pretty important, right? In the context of me being sovereign of Calontir today, I couldn't possibly rule over the people of Calontir without each and every member that had come before me to set the thrones, to create Calontir, to take over as Baron of the local groups and help create the customs, the traditions that we all hold very dearly today. And each of us fights for in our own way to maintain. Even now, today, while we can't participate together, it's wonderful to see discussions like this where we continue to maintain those customs and those traditions in our own way, kind of showing deference to those household gods, and it means a lot to me.
What are the acts of faith we might be able to engage in to replace such things in the context of the SCA, to replace the medieval acts such as regular church and feast days, crusades, etc.? Where can we find our acts of faith and our outward acts within the SCA?
You know, Renji, that's a good question. And personally, to me, my outward acts of faith is when I go to an event, helping people, stepping up and being a marshal to ensure that somebody else is having a good time. If you talk to my Squire brother Bjarm at Feast of Eagles last year, or Simiaka was there. In fact, it took Simiaka, His Excellency Simiaka, to order me to drive back home 15 minutes to pick up my armor and come back, because I was going to do my act of service to my shire by marshaling fighting events. So to me, the outward acts of supporting what we do for a hobby is the service, is the step of faith, putting the trust out there to ensure that somebody else is going to have a good time. And that's the reason why I do it. Simiaka, you got anything else? Would you like to add? Oh, uh-oh, he's running away.
I do.
Go ahead,
So,
Don. Welcome back.
speaking on the framework that I laid out earlier, right? And that's just a possible framework, but accepting the framework that the SCA at large, I guess theoretically, through the board as the church, as it were, but the medieval church explicitly laid down requirements for how a person should live and how they should live a good life. And the SCA lays down the framework for what we should do to be members in good standing of the SCA. And those requirements are variable depending on who and what you are. There are different requirements for peers of the realm than there are for, but I'm going to give a simple example, right? Corpora requires that everybody make an attempt at period guard. And I think that is absolutely a sliding scale requirement, because I think that you should make that attempt in good faith. And so if you are showing up to an event for the first time as a poor college student and what you're wearing is not what, say, a Laurel might be wearing after 30 years in the SCA, that is absolutely acceptable, because you are in good faith making that attempt at period guard. If you've been in the SCA for 30 years and keep showing up in that same short sleeve polyester tunic, and you're a member of a GOA or a peerage order, I would say that you are in fact a heretic and are not making a good faith attempt.
I don't know if everybody's tracking the group chat, but Simiaka came up and posted that one of the concepts we seem to be coming across again and again in this is the idea of we are more important than I. I, as a knight, feel that I must make the we better through my actions. Perhaps for me, the faith is in the we. I think that's a really good point.
Kind of a cleaner version of what I tried to post.
That resonates with me as well. I think one could say faith in humanity, but I also believe that I have faith that we individually and we as a group are not perfect. Which more cynical folks might say, I have faith that we will fail to meet our ideals.
I do think it's important to remember, like, whichever framework we choose to go by, and that's individual choice. The medieval expression of faith was actions, not words. If you did pious acts, you were by definition a pious person. The whole concept of, well, he does that, but he thinks that, is a much later Protestant addition to the church.
I would agree with that, Donegal, but the other issue is that if you do A, but you say Y, then you're going to lose credibility with people, and people will take that into account too. So you've got to, set a good standard and try to meet it. But if you're consistently saying one thing and doing another, people will take that into account, and you'll lose, whatever credibility you've got.
Am I able to be heard at this point?
Yes, Hugo, go ahead.
Excellent. I for some reason, I think my speakers turned off my microphone. Without diving into a historical or pedantic argument, I agree with His Grace in so much as there is a generality of the medieval Catholic viewpoint, but that's not a consistent perspective that we saw historically. But to focus on the point that was made about acts and deeds, and bring it back to Rengia's question about how we replace that and how faith manifests itself, something that I find to be an important part of my SCA experience, having been back for several years at this point, is the idea of faith as the dream, that cultural aspect, as separate from the crown and rulership. And so when I am in court, at the end of a court, and there is the call of long live the king, queen, long live the sovereign lands of Calontir, and the cries out that I can cry out as well, the acts of deference and class and station, without getting into that whole, that's an entirely another rabbit hole, but the idea of, calling people by their titles of, Sir John, even though I know John is annoyed at me every time I do that, but that idea of faith and respect and giving people, lauding them for right acts and right deeds and prowess, I think those kind of cultural things that we do in the SCA become to me kind of an aspect of faith in the dream, as it were, in ways that it manifests when I'm, at events and sharing time with other Scadians. And I find it's a really key part of keeping me tied into the ideals of the SCA, which I think is a way that faith can manifest itself in this context.
Thank you, Hugo.
One thing I think about faith is that no matter what your belief system, it involves something bigger than yourself. It takes you out of your little core inner self and puts you in a larger context. Perhaps getting a big head a little bit, but going back to that concept of we, helping others, I think that's an important aspect to our society, thing that we can do at every event that we're at, helping one another to be better than we currently are, helping our society to be better than it currently is.
Very well said, Conna. Thank you.
Hugo talked, mentioned a number of things that for him are part of that dream. And like any discussion of the virtues, we're going to start. My first reaction was, oh no, that's, franchise, or no, that's humility, and realizing that again, all these virtues are so overlapped that I've never been in a conversation about any one that didn't immediately trend into three others.
Interrelated. They are all related. Thank you, Fernando, for that. Yes, that comment. I agree completely. It's one of the reasons
I faith specifically really overlaps a lot of them, maybe more so than some of the others. What do you think about that?
I'm going to wait for somebody else to speak first.
I think, Connor, you're probably right. The other ones don't mean anything unless you have faith in them, right? Or faith in yourself when you take the field prowess, faith in the others around you when you invite them into your home and give them hospitality. There's a lot of overlap when we talk about faith in people. If we're talking about faith in some divine and those other virtues, it's almost required to give those other virtues meaning.
Foundational.
But the issue of the tangles hits, you can find most of the virtues you can tie back into everything. Like, courage is an easy one. It doesn't matter if you don't have the courage to do X, Y, or Z, you're never going to use any, you're not going to use those. So it always comes back to the idea of which virtue is the most important. And I think we can find 10 different medieval writers who talked about 10 different virtues as the most important. And my answer to that question has always come down to the most important virtue is the one that's missing, because I don't think you can pick one that's more important.
I agree with you, Fernando. And the virtue that's most important to one individual in one moment may be completely different from another individual in the same moment or in a different moment. The most valuable, the MVP of the virtues is the set, because you can reflect on them and find the one that you need to hone if you have time to reflect, which many of us do. But you're right about the interrelations as well, I think.
Which string in the fishing net is the most important? For the fish, it's the one that's missing.
Yeah, the best net has all the strings and none missing. I think that's a good analogy. And one of the things that I told myself early in this was that I was going to not be afraid to call this to a close a little earlier than it might run. And so, with that, I'm gonna ask once more if people have additional comments, and I'm gonna pause for water.
Your Excellency, first of all, thank you for running this. And secondly, I see a gentleman on here who's going to be moving into our kingdom shortly. Good friend of mine from the Outlands, Joel.
He's already here.
He's already here. Would you care to take a moment and introduce yourself and your lovely lady there, JT?
Hey everyone, Joel currently in Artemisia. We're going to be moving out to Cedar Rapids here in July. Been friends with John for basically, him and I started around the same time in the SCA umpteen years ago. He's aged a lot worse than I have though.
I still got my hair. And Joel is an evil lefty as well.
My wife here. Yeah. My wife here, Aniela, she does all the things. I pretty much just do a lot of fighting and research for my area of arts, but she does all the things, makes all the things, does all the things. So yeah, we're going to be out your guys' way in July. Looking forward to being to play with everyone once the apocalypse is over.
Joel and Yella, thank you so much for introducing yourselves. It's great to see you again. It has been too long, Joel, since we crossed blades. I think it was. Wow, that's bad feedback. I look forward to seeing both of you face to face soon enough. Other comments?
Before we go, Hirsch, if anybody would like a copy of my notes, please drop me a PM and I would be glad to type them up and send them out.
Wonderful.
I wanted to share just one thing before we signed off. We talked about things that we do personally to reinforce these beliefs and virtues. I will make apology in the onset because this is more for the peers. But one of the things that I do for myself that is reminiscent of, I think, possibly a historical Christian night is when I step first onto the field for a day event or a weekend long event, and I cloak myself in Connell Ian McTavish. I take my fealty chain and I say my oath to myself, touching the links of my chain. And I think that that's something that could be done across the board with laurels and pelicans and royal peers, depending on how you view your oaths to the crown. But it helps center me, sort of like a prayer. It is the foundation that I stand on as a knight and a pelican, is that oath that I have with the crown, and the weight that it puts on me to support the society and the kingdoms at large.
That's a really, Connell, that's a good reminder to each of us to reflect on what do we do to remind ourselves. And I appreciate everyone's comments, thoughts, questions. Renji, I'm going to call you out as having the best question because I feel like that's the one that I'm going to be thinking about the most is what actions. It's a little challenging some days. I appreciate everybody's comments. John, Conna, thank you very much. I hope that everyone, has an opportunity to continue this conversation with friends, with family, or just with yourself in your head. Also, I have a thing. This is a stone from Chepstow Castle. It is just a rock, but it's a stone from perhaps the oldest fortification in Britain, home to William the Marshal. Fernando has one too. I have likened this time to winter. So look to your stones, look to your stores, but find your rock. Check in with your neighbors, mend your walls, because good fences make good neighbors. And check in, look forward to spring. I'm looking forward to it, but first we must get through these cold times. Find your rock, find your base, whether it's faith, family, friends. What works for you is going to work. I also want to leave you with a toast. Just water. Always important. And in these trying times, to your health. Thank you.